Hello, everyone. My name is Dylan Martello, and I'm joined here by Michelle Lambert and Kent Gonzalez. And we look forward to talking to you guys today about Northland Newton Development in Newton, Massachusetts. And we're going to talk high level about the project. We're going to get into the nitty gritty stuff as well. But first, let us introduce ourselves to you. Again, my name is Dylan. I work for Stephen Winter Associates as a passive house design consultant. Stephen Winter Associates, we are a building consulting company that focuses on energy conservation, green building certifications, decarbonization and net zero, general sustainability consulting, and accessibility consulting as well, with a Boston location being the newest of our offices, in addition to New York, Washington, D.C., and Norwalk, Connecticut. I'm going to hand it over now to Kent.
Thanks, Dylan. I'm Kent Gonzalez. I'm Vice President of Development with Northland Investment Corporation, and the Northland Newton Development is my primary project responsibility and has been for the last 10 years. A little bit about Northland Investment Corporation. We were founded in 1970. We're headquartered in Newton, Massachusetts. And we have about 25,000 apartment units in 13 states across the country. And we have about $6 billion in real estate assets, and it includes commercial as well as apartment assets. And we are privately owned. Michelle?
Thanks, Kent. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Lambert. I'm the founding principal of Lambert Sustainability. I'm an architect, and I have been practicing architecture and sustainable design consulting for about 22 years now. My firm is located in the Boston area, and we do strategic sustainability consulting. We do some research projects around decarbonization of buildings, and I also teach and provide a lot of education around various sustainability topics in the region.
Awesome. Thank you. So just a quick outline here on what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about Northland Newton Development and talk about the vision of the project and its sustainability goals. And Kent and Michelle are really going to elaborate on how this project is an all-encompassing project, not just related to energy. That's one component of a lot of different components going into this project. We're going to dig into the design and talk about how the passive house concepts are being applied to this project. And really, we want to focus on what makes this project unique. We want to focus on particularly Northland Newton Development's role in whole building electrification. So, the headline here being that this is an all-electric residential mixed-use development for the residential component, which is really sort of a huge step in a direction that I think we all agree we need to go to. So that's going to be one component, one big component of this presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to Kent to give some project overview. Kent?
All right. Thank you, Dylan. Go to the next slide. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Boston, this is the area outlined in yellow is our project. It's about 22.6 acres, and it's inside Interstate 95, Route 128 belt that encircles Boston. And if you're inside that belt, it's usually pretty high profile, high value land. And we're located in Newton, Massachusetts. And for this community, probably the largest, we are the largest development site remaining in the city. So it's a very exciting location for us to be in, and a very wonderful opportunity for us to be able to do something that is going to be meaningful, not just another run-of-the-mill development. So this is an outline of the site, almost as it exists today. All of the buildings you see inside this site are being demolished, except there's a linear building along the bottom of the site. Dylan, if you can highlight that. That is the Saco Petty Mill building. It's been around since the late 1800s. And that really sort of forms a centerpiece for our project as we go forward to redevelop the site. And as you'll see as we go forward, you'll see what kind of role it plays. It will not be part of the passive house, but component of our project, but it is going to be LEED certified core and shell, not to mention it's reusing a critical asset and repurposing it. Next. So what's our vision for this site? It's probably a lot of the same thing that you hear about a lot of other projects. We want it to be vibrant. We want it to be walkable. We want it to be integrated. And in order for us to do that, we spend a lot of time looking at other projects around the country, notably District Wharf in Washington, D.C., Assembly Row here in Somerville, Massachusetts, Santana Row, San Jose, California, Bethesda Row, and Pike and Rose, both in Bethesda, Maryland. So we wanted to make sure we have self-contained community village, if you will, because we had the ability and the capability to do that given the large size of the site. And in addition, we saw this as an opportunity to create an option for housing in Newton that doesn't exist today, namely good new rental housing. There's really not much rental housing in Newton, so that's an option for people that are looking for a way to move into a community like this. That option just doesn't exist until we do this, project. Next slide. Oh, and I guess the other thing I should say too is, and one of the reasons we're here today is probably a key component of this project always was sustainability, but we'll talk a little bit more about how sustainability became even a more critical component of this project as the project continued to evolve and we continue to engage with the community. So basically the site is 22.6 acres, as I said. We've got 10 acres of open space. There are 800 units of apartments, 140 of which are affordable. The Sacopeti Mill represents about 190,000 square feet of office space. Then in addition to that, we'll have ground floor, street level, active retail of about 104,000, 105,000 square feet. And then in addition to that, we have 1,600 parking spaces. Zoning would have required much more, but as part of our approach to get people out of their cars and provide other options, like a shuttle system to public transit, we're only providing one space per apartment, whether you're a studio or a 3-bedroom apartment. Next slide. This is another hallmark of the project. It's 800 units, but 660 of those units are market. And as I said before, 140 are affordable. But the key here, I think, is that it's one of the largest passive house projects, market rate passive house projects that we're aware of. And I think Dylan can probably talk more to that. But, and then as we talk later about our sustainability strategies, there are other really unique elements about this project that make it special beyond the diversity of housing that we're providing for the community, ranging from studios to 3 bedrooms. But then you can see in the chart on the right, the level of affordability that we're providing for the residents. And when you see 80% AMI, that's 80% of the average median income in the community. So you can see that we're providing a combination of workforce at 80 to 110% of the average median income in this community, as well as 80% and 50%. Next. So this is, between Dylan and Michelle, they're going to address some of the elements that are on the slide, but I think this is one of the key components or key elements of this project that make it really more sustainable than what you might see just in a normal passive house project. Number one, we feel that this is going to be one of the largest, or if not the largest, all-electric passive house project in the country. And it's also one of the largest market rate passive house projects in the country. Most of the passive house projects that we're familiar with here in the Northeast have always been affordable housing strictly. So we're really literally trying to push the envelope to try to engage creative architecture and at the same time achieve the passive house standards. And one other thing is, I'm sorry, if you go back, and this is really something I'm really excited about as well, not just that it's passive house, but that we've integrated LEED into all of these buildings, so that not only will these buildings be all passive house certified, the residential buildings, all but 4 of them, they'll also, all of the residential buildings will be LEED for multifamily gold certified. Next. So this is really the crux of this project. When we started this project 10 years ago, we spent the first 4 years working with our master planning teams, really studying these other projects I mentioned before and other projects around the world, trying to see how best to plan for the 22-acre opportunity that we had. So in those first 4 years, like I say, we spent a lot of time, and then in 2016, we formally announced the project to the community, and then started working with the community. And so between 2016 and 2018, we had numerous meetings illustrated here, public festivals to try to bring people to the site and engage them in conversation about what's happening, and they could see really the scale of the site. Many people who were from Newton had no idea the site even existed and had no idea how big it was. But as part of that process, and this is really sort of the key to how exciting this whole effort was, is that we engaged with the local sustainability group, and we were so excited and proud when we went to present this project to them that it was going to be really focused on LEED. They weren't impressed. They pushed us towards passive house. Some would say we resisted kicking and screaming. I would say maybe we didn't kick, but we did scream. So, and Michelle had been our sustainability consultant all along, and in several meetings, they wanted us to really pursue passive house. So we kept saying no until we said, okay, we'll look at it. And Michelle engaged with Stephen Winter, and Stephen Winter brought us Jack Frost, or also known as Dylan Martello, the passive house expert, one of them from Stephen Winter. And Dylan came in and gave a presentation, sort of a seminar to our entire design team to understand how passive house worked, and used one of our buildings as an example. And from there, we really started to embrace passive house holistically. And we haven't looked back since. Next. This is another component of our sustainability strategies, and that is a transit system that helps supplement the lack of parking to try to get people out of their cars. We've got a private shuttle that we will operate that runs 16 hours a day, every 10 minutes, that'll circulate from this site, and it's open to the public, not just the people who live here, and it will circulate to a public transit station just about a mile away from our site. Next. And this is an illustration of the landscape illustration of the site. You can see that the 10 acres of open space. And if you look down between buildings 3 and 4, that's the village green. That's really the centerpiece of the site. The city of Newton is known as the city of 13 villages, but none of them have the quintessential New England village green. And here that was a key design element for this project, oriented around that village green. And it also provides a foreground for the Sacopeti Mill that's directly to the south of it. Next. And Michelle and Dylan will talk more about this, but just to give you an idea of the 9 buildings that are all going to be passive house certified. Now, all of the buildings will have a LEED certification of some sort, but the blue buildings you see here will all be passive house certified, in addition to LEED for multifamily homes certified. Next. Now I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour because I know I'm running off, my time slot's running over. I'm sorry, team. But this is building 3, which if you look in the upper right-hand corner of the slide, you'll see the view orientation. You're looking from what we call building 5 across Main Street to the corner of building 3, which we tried to incorporate we used a lot of bricks so that it would relate to the Sacco-Petty mill that's behind it. Next. And this is a view of the village green, and you'll see the Sacco-Petty mill in the background and building 3 over to the left. And also just remember that every building that you're going to see here is a passive house building other than the Sacco-Petty mill in the background. Next. This is building 4, and again, it's Sacco-Petty mill building is off to the left, and the village green is also to your left. Next. This is building 5. Again, you're looking from the Sacco-Petty mill across the village green towards building 5. And one of the key components that we're very proud of here is the notorious curtain wall. We were able to incorporate curtain wall into a passive house building. And it's obvious triple paned and thermally broken, but we do have curtain wall. One of the primary goals on all of these buildings, as I said earlier, was to stretch the envelope, push the envelope, because people want as much transparency and natural light in their units as they can get. And that was one of the reasons we didn't want to do passive house initially, because we had this impression that you could only do little windows. And that's the last thing we wanted to do for our apartment buildings. But lo and behold, we've overcome that clearly. Next. This is building 6, again, looking from the edge of the village green along Main Street. Again, you'll see there's a good amount of curtain wall on this building as well. Next. This is one of the things that we did do through the design process and through the community engagement process is the two blocks that you see in the upper right-hand corner. I'm sorry, in the upper right-hand corner of the image, you'll see there are 2 sort of larger blocks in the key plan. There you go, Dylan. Those buildings were originally super blocks, and with parking oriented in the center of the block and the buildings oriented around it. And part of the community engagement process is that people didn't really want to see these super blocks, and we didn't argue with them. We thought that was a great idea. We pushed all of our parking below grade and created these multi-purpose laneways that we consider really more like European auto courts. The pedestrian is the key, but there will be intermittent vehicular access through here for service, things like that. Next slide. And this is another building, and you'll see it's behind Michelle. This is a CLT building, cross-laminated timber building, which again, it adds to our sustainability strategies. Next. This is an axon of the structural system. What you see in red is steel. Everything else is wood, from the floors to the structure, to the ceilings. Next. And this is an interior view of what that building will feel like with the exposed timber throughout. Next. And this is one of our smaller residential buildings along what we call the neighborhood edge of the project. A 4-story building, again, passive house certified and LEED for multifamily certified. Next. And this is our team. And you'll see here that we've got 3 different architecture firms, 2 different landscape architecture firms. And we've got Michelle, who, I don't know if I said this earlier, but we call Michelle Mother Earth because she's overseen our overall sustainability strategy throughout. And again, brought in Stephen Winter Associates, and Dylan, Jack Frost. And Stephen Winter is not just doing passive house for us, but they're also overseeing our LEED certification for multifamily homes, as well as the envelope, coordinating with the entire team on envelope details. So I will now turn it over to Michelle. Sorry, I took too much time, Michelle.
No problem. Thanks, Kent. Dylan, can you just start back on that team slide? Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. So as Kent said, my role on this project has been the overarching sustainability consultant and the coordinator from the very beginning. I got involved in 2018 around the start of the permitting process and very early design. And I was tasked with developing the sustainability approach and the goals for the project. And in that, bringing together, as you can see on this slide, very large team of the architects, the landscape architects, the civil, mechanical engineers. We had transportation consultants, the owners, all together sort of generating ideas related to sustainability and different approaches that we wanted to take. So I was tasked with really bringing it all together into a cohesive vision for the project that we were then able to communicate to the city staff, the city council, all the presentations we made publicly to the residents and the various community groups of Newton. Next slide. You can go to the next one. So I like to put this in just to reiterate the definition of sustainable development, because true sustainable development, as defined by the United Nations, embraces all three of these really essential components. So environmental is obviously the protection of our planet and its resources, climate mitigation, resilience. It's what we most often think about, right, when we think about sustainability. There is also an important component of economic prosperity of the project so that it has long-term success in the market and in the place where it is developed. And then the third is the social piece, which sometimes, gets left off the sustainable development definition. So it really talks about the people, enhancing the lives of all of the people who will live and work and play and recreate here, as well as the surrounding existing community. So all three elements of development really of these things must really occur for a project to truly be sustainable development. So I actually included this image in all of my presentations to the city council to help them understand holistically what we were trying to do with this project. And that our project was going to address things like energy conservation and climate mitigation, protecting natural resources, but also things like healthy building materials and reducing cars and affordable housing and equitable access to the project for all, that all of those things were really part of our sustainability vision for the project. What makes this development unique, I think, is its layered approach to sustainability, that it really captures a wide range of strategies and reduces impacts at every scale. So it's not just a group of LEED certified buildings or even a group of Passive House certified buildings that you may find at other large scale projects. The sustainability program here addresses nearly every challenge that we face as a global community in making sure that our building projects, and in particular our large neighborhood development projects like this one, provide holistic positive change for future generations. So let's start at the neighborhood scale, which includes this development as well as the connections to the surrounding existing neighborhoods and the community. So as Kent touched on, sustainability rating systems and metrics like LEED and Passive House provide us a design framework for some of the most cutting edge ideas out there. And they also ensure accountability to see them through when we pursue, actual certification under these rating systems. So as Kent mentioned, the entire 22-acre site, plus every single one of the new 14 buildings and the existing historic building, will be designed to achieve third-party sustainability certifications. The entire site is pursuing LEED for neighborhood development at the silver level. This will actually be only the fourth project in Massachusetts to achieve LEED ND certification as a complete sustainable neighborhood. The strategies included in LEED ND are very synonymous with smart growth, and many of these concepts were incorporated into this project at the very earliest planning and design stages so that they would be integral to its evolution through design. So I'm just going to really briefly cover a couple of sustainability goals at the neighborhood scale. As Kent also mentioned, the project works really hard through several means to reduce dependence on single occupancy vehicles and also on fossil fuel-based transportation methods. So starting at the diagram on the left, the design for walkability and pedestrian connections to the surrounding neighborhoods establishes a new community destination, both for living and working, and also use for the new parks and amenities for the residents and also everyone outside of the development. In the center, the creation of new bike lanes through the site, as well as connections to local and regional bike trails, including the Upper Falls Greenway on the left of the site, allows residents to actually bike to the T or to bike to other local town centers. And finally, the robust transportation management plan that was developed works to reduce single occupancy vehicles and their associated carbon emissions in a few ways. So the new mobility hub, which will provide access to transit options, will be a place where residents and the public can gather to wait for various shuttle and bus transportation, and also be a gathering place for the community. On-site electric car charging stations will be located throughout the project for both the residents and the public to promote electric vehicle ownership. And vehicle, bike, and scooter share programs will be located on the site as well. So many means to try to reduce our single occupancy vehicles. So moving from the neighborhood into the site scale, as Kent mentioned, there's going to be 10 new acres of open space, which equals 44% of the total site area. And they're being designed as part of a holistic plan to conserve and restore natural resources on the site, but also to encourage outdoor living and access to nature. So even more important now, as we're all, living through this pandemic, we really more fully understand the critical importance of outdoor space, of having fresh air, and of having access to nature throughout our day. The diverse network of open spaces on the project was really carefully designed for both passive and active uses, and to encourage spending time outdoors for both physical and mental health. Contact with nature, we've known for a long time, has proven beneficial to our health. And some of the features on the site, like the ecological restoration of the South Meadow Brook to the north of the site, as well as extensive landscaping and tree cover to provide shade, and plants that will attract pollinators. All of these things will provide those health benefits of natural areas. Next slide. So in addition to these open spaces and parks, the streetscapes have also been designed to prioritize people over cars. Complete streets are defined as streets that provide safe and accessible options for all travel modes: walking, biking, transit, and for vehicles, as well as for people of all ages and all abilities. So in this street section, you can see that there will be wide sidewalks, lots of tree shading, permeable paving, which will help to manage the stormwater, and design elements that will slow the traffic down for cyclists and pedestrians to feel comfortable walking throughout the site. Next slide. Water conservation, as well as storm flooding impacts, are something that's really becoming more and more of a concern in our region and throughout the country as well. Our team of civil engineers and landscape designers worked hard to design this extensive, innovative stormwater management plan, which includes, just to touch on a few, rainwater harvesting. So we will capture much of the rainwater and store it underground to be used for irrigation. There's also drought-tolerant plants indigenous to the region in the landscape design throughout, so that it won't require watering. And the low-impact design strategies, which include things like bioswales, permeable paving materials, will help to reduce the stormwater runoff and mitigate any flood possibilities as well. So the goal really from the beginning was to capture and manage as much as up to 100% of the rainwater on site as was possible, which will really help to reduce stress on the city's stormwater sewer systems. Next slide. This is actually a roof mapping diagram of the project. All of the building roofs are designed as usable spaces on this project and are considered valuable real estate. So all of the roof areas will host either people, plants, or power. So in the diagram, it's a little bit small and hard to see, but essentially there are shaded areas representing a number of things. There are outdoor spaces and amenities and roof decks for the residents. So those roof areas serve the people. There are green roofs that will collect rainwater as well as host wildlife. Those are the plants. and then photovoltaic panels for renewable energy generation on site for the power. And then outside of that, all of the other roof areas will be designed with light colored reflective roofing materials that will help to reduce the heat island effect of the project. Next slide. And finally, we're moving into the building scale. So developed in parallel with this project's permitting process, the city of Newton developed their sustainability ordinance, which is now in effect and requires a green building certification compliance for all projects that require a special permit. Passive house certification through PHI, as Kent mentioned, will be achieved here for at least over half of the residential units, shown in dark orange on the plan. And Dylan is going to get into the details on the passive house strategies in just a moment. But in addition, all of the buildings, including the passive house buildings, will achieve LEED V4 for multifamily residential at the gold level. And LEED for core and shell certification is being pursued for building 1 in white, which is that historic 1893 Saccopetti Mill building, as well as for building 2, which is a small commercial space. So every single building will meet one, if not multiple, sustainability rating systems. Next slide. So the last sort of piece that I wanted to cover is embodied carbon. In addition to making some really significant reductions in the operating energy and the operating carbon that Dylan's going to talk more about, the project is also incorporating some really innovative strategies to reduce the embodied carbon. So I'm sure most of you have heard before from Architecture 2030, who produced that pie chart on the left, or others. The built environment contributes almost 40% of our CO2 emissions worldwide. Most of this, the 28%, is the building operations. But just in the last few years, really, we have this new understanding about the embodied energy and the embodied carbon of our building materials being also a very significant piece of that emissions profile. So the diagram on the right illustrates the definition of embodied carbon, which is the emissions resulting from the energy that it requires to mine, to process, manufacture, transport, and construct all of our building materials when we build our buildings. And that is equal to about 11% of our global greenhouse gas emissions. So in addition to requiring sustainability certifications, green building certifications, the sustainability ordinance in Newton actually also requires that projects assess the embodied carbon of their building materials and incorporate into the design process lower embodied carbon materials whenever that is proven to be feasible. So our project's doing a number of things in this area to reduce embodied carbon. Next slide. So you've probably heard the term before, the greenest building is the one that's already built. Reusing existing buildings and all of those materials that have all that embodied energy already having been produced is inherently sustainable. So next slide. As Kent mentioned, the Saccopetti Mill building is an adaptive reuse project into fully renovated office space, and will be achieving LEED core and shell at the silver level. And in addition to this building, the project is also preserving and reusing a number of the culturally significant, historically significant elements of the other buildings that were in disrepair, that were demolished on the site. And a lot of those materials will be repurposed throughout the project. Next slide. When you are building new, one of the lowest carbon building materials that you can choose to build from is wood. And particularly when it's sustainably harvested and manufactured, it will sequester carbon. Next slide. So as it was touched on already, building 7, which is shown here, houses the mobility hub on the first level, and then 3 levels of residential units above, and will be constructed of cross-laminated timber, or CLT. This choice provides a number of benefits. It has a unique aesthetic with biophilia elements. You can see the interior image of this project behind Dylan, with all of the warmth and natural attributes of wood, as well as having a much lower embodied carbon footprint than the alternative concrete and steel building. Next slide. the project design and construction teams have also identified some lower carbon, embodied carbon material options that are being analyzed. So using the current data included in the Carbon Leadership Forum materials baselines, we wrote project specifications that identify lower embodied carbon targets than average for some of the key structural and enclosure material components. So these low carbon specifications target some of the most dominant carbon intensive materials, including the structural steel, the ready mix concrete, insulation, and the gypboard. So the construction manager is pricing and looking into these lower carbon alternatives to identify, this is all still relatively new and relatively new in our area, our region. So looking at, if there are any cost differences, what the availability or supply chain challenges might be to help us determine which lower carbon materials we will be able to incorporate into the project, which is exciting. And additionally, the design teams and specifically the structural engineer really worked hard on the structural design to make it as efficient as possible with the intent to minimize the steel and the concrete, going into all of the other buildings on the site that are not the CLT project. Next slide. And then finally, there's work being done as well to better understand the role of landscaping in reducing embodied carbon of a project and sequestering carbon on site. The tools that are, going to help us better quantify this are sort of under development now, but we do know that the trees and the plants, and particularly the soil, sequesters a lot of carbon and provides a lot of benefit for the project in that area. Next slide. And you can see, as you saw before, the site as it currently sits on the left is almost entirely paved, covered with abandoned industrial buildings, very, very little green space or vegetation. And when the project is complete, we'll have 10 new acres of green space, hundreds of trees and plants and green roof areas, all of which will also contribute to reducing the carbon footprint of the project. So that was an overview of our sustainability goals and a lot of the features in a number of areas. And now I will hand it over to Dylan, who's going to really do a deep dive into Passive House and our electrification strategies.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Kent, for giving a high-level overview of the project. And, as Michelle mentioned, we're going to sort of dig in now a little bit deeper to some of the nitty-gritty design stuff. And really, I think focus here on electrification with as kind of the main highlight, and really the steps that this project is taking towards decarbonization and getting all the way there in terms of sustainability. There's so much happening in terms of sustainability on this project, and this is just one small component of it. But obviously, it's definitely an important one, and one that I think we're seeing a lot of passive house projects start to try to kind of bridge that gap between, okay, like we know how to do passive house, we know how to really cut our energy loads in our building down. How do we take that next step now in electrifying and getting to sort of the decarbonization goal that we're trying to get to? Because I think that's sort of the one missing, or one area that we need to sort of drive our buildings towards. And this project is a really fantastic example of a way to do that. So we're going to start with a really boring Excel-made graph here, table, because we had all nice, pretty pictures and stuff, and now I'm just going to bore everyone with some Excel stuff. Now that's only half true. But I wanted to just kind of, for the more technical folks in the crowd here, really kind of just show a little bit of a snapshot on a majority of these buildings that are going to be Passive House certified. So these are the phase 1 portion. These are the first, this is about 7 buildings here. And then there's 2 buildings that are not shown on this that are part of phase 2. But I just ran out of space before you can actually read stuff. So that's why we're just looking at the phase 1 buildings here. Now, Kent gave you a tour of the site and a tour of these buildings. So you kind of have an idea already of what these buildings look like. Obviously, some have curtain wall. Um, the window designs are unique and interesting to this project. You can see here, there's a lot of information on this, but I'll highlight a few things. One, window to wall ratio, fairly variable across the buildings. And, this, as many of you know, it's not just about the window to wall ratio when you're talking about a passive house design, it's also about where those windows are located. So we did work very closely all the way up in, start of conceptual design of this project. And, the design team was fantastic to work with. And, the architects were really receptive to suggestions, simply, like, hey, let's eliminate some windows on the north facade and move them. If we can't get them on the south, at least the east and west facades, because the north facades are really our weak points in terms of the windows performance, because they don't get that solar gain. And we really went through that process, particularly the architects, in refining the window design through multiple iterations to optimize the performance of these buildings, while still achieving the design intent that ownership and Kent's team need to market this building. But you can see, there's a fairly decent range. Building 12, 27% window to wall ratio. Building 7 as the biggest one at 48%, with a majority of the buildings coming in the mid to high 30s to low 40% range. One thing that we also really spent a lot of time with the architects working on was reducing window mullions when possible. So framing, reducing the amount of framing in these windows is something that we spent a lot of time to help bolster the performance of these windows. Now, as far as sort of the wall systems, majority of the buildings have a steel stud backup wall system. Building 12, the smaller building, is actually a wood framed backup wall building with 2x6 construction, and continuous mineral wool as the exterior insulation layer. And then, mineral wool filled within the cavity, or a low GWP closed cell spray foam in the cavity, depending on these buildings. But one of the things that we really tried to do with this project, which is tough, but I think made a really valiant effort, is to make things as standard across the buildings as possible, even though each building had its own PHPP model, its own unique performance criteria, performance of the building, and had to hit the criteria. But we want to try to find synergies across these buildings to make sure that the projects are, not going to be all built in different ways, because that would be a nightmare for the contractor, which is going to be building all of these buildings. So jumping a little bit more into some details here, I'm going to just go right to the big one as it relates to electrification, and that's domestic hot water, which I think, and I don't know if I'm the only one here, but I feel that the word of the year in 2021 probably should have been electrification. I don't know how it didn't win, but there was obviously a lot of talk about electrification. And really the biggest things when we talk about electrification, I'd say are, particularly in residential buildings, are space heating and domestic hot water. And space heating, I'll say it, we've had it figured out, I think, pretty well for probably the last 10 years, if not longer. We know how to do it. There's a lot of projects that have electrified their space heating system. So I don't think there's really any excuse why we shouldn't be electrifying our space heating systems. Domestic hot water, though, however, that's the challenging one. And I think a lot of you probably already are aware of that. And really what it comes down to is, how do we do this in a way that, meets the domestic hot water load in the building, and also allows the project to sort of meter the building as they need to meter it. And in this case, we had to go with a decentralized approach, particularly because when you go with a centralized system, it becomes extremely complicated and costly to meter those buildings if you want to pass the hot water costs on to the tenants. And that was something that needed to be done, was to have that hot water costs passed on to the tenants. So really the options that we looked at were, looked at heat pump water heating options and particularly some case studies that we've seen where heat pump water heaters are installed in multifamily buildings with just a decentralized approach, like in unit heat pump water heaters. And it's really, really challenging to get those to work properly. They need enough air volume. They're going to be blowing out cold air. They're noisy. And what we found is on a lot of projects, even where they are installed properly, complaints have caused owners or building operators to turn them into electric resistance mode year round. So what we looked at was, hey, we don't feel confident that we can really deliver a decentralized in-unit approach with heat pump water heaters in a way that we felt confident in that would actually be operated that way. So we looked at electric resistance, insulated tanks as the option, and really one thing that's nice about the primary energy renewable criteria for the passive house designers in the crowd is that it really is beneficial for all electric buildings, and you can go to electric resistance tanks. You can go to electric resistance tanks in unit for domestic hot water and still meet the passive house primary energy thresholds. And that was the case for this project. Okay, so just a couple of other aspects of the design here. The ventilation system is a centralized based ventilation system. And this was to really help, limit the number of ERVs in the project, helps with quality control purposes. It allows you to, have your maintenance staff maintain only a couple of ERVs, change filters a couple times a year on a few ERVs, not do it on, hundreds of them. And it's balanced ventilation, very typical for passive house, with 84% heat recovery in those units, and central ductwork, which we'll get into in a minute with respect to the measures that are being taken to ensure that the ductwork is sealed properly and working as it should. And then on the heating and cooling side, it's a VRF system with heat recovery, which we'll talk about in a minute as the sort of highlighting the benefits of that. So on the ductwork system themselves, one of the biggest things with centralized ductwork, especially in residential buildings, is you have a lot of kind of spaghetti network of ductwork, a lot of horizontal turns, a lot of joints. That's going to be where air can leak out, and that's where the typical hand sealing of ductwork can sometimes not be fully effective. So what we do is we specify that all of the ductwork needs to have gone through the aeroseal process, which is basically injecting a duct sealant, if you will, into the actual ductwork, the inside of the ductwork, pressurize the duct, and it fills any holes and gaps, I believe, quarter of an inch or smaller. And it really helps with those hard to reach areas, particularly the tops of ductwork is where we've seen problems and challenges, is getting good seals on the tops of ductworks. So the aeroseal is really there to help ensure that the ducts are performing and not losing air, because that's any air that's lost from the ductwork system is air that's typically not getting to the desired register. And it's also additional fan horsepower that the ERVs have to make up for, and they have to eventually push more air through the building to get the air that we designed at the registers that is serving the building. And then lastly, on the VRF system. So, one of the things that we are seeing on a lot of passive house projects across the board is that, people, and this comes down to comfort and occupant, the way occupants sort of, want their spaces to be in terms of livability, is people like it at different temperatures. So, these are actual thermostat readings from, this is not Northland Newton, this is another Passive House project, Beach Green Dunes, that Mark Ginsburg helped gather this data from. And you can see that, there's a range, 70 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit, all on the same day, in terms of the, where the apartment is at. And some people like their apartments hotter, some people like their apartments cooler. Some people are, used to living in old buildings with steam radiators that overheat the space, and they're used to opening their windows in the wintertime because it's so freaking hot. So you really gotta be aware of that. And really what the big takeaway here is that, if you can provide efficient simultaneous heating and cooling, like a heat recovery system on a VRF is, that's one example of a way to do it. There's other systems, there's other ways to do simultaneous heating and cooling capability in your heating and cooling system. This is just, the way to do it with VRF systems. It's really, really important for occupant comfort. And, occupant comfort is a big part of the Passive House standard and something that we don't want to, skimp on. So that's just, one lesson learned. And then that's something that, this project is implementing. So we are excited for that. Okay, so that's just a high level, but somewhat nitty gritty nutshell on some of the electrification stuff. We are actually at time here with our actual presentation slides, and we definitely would like to thank you for listening to us talk about this really exciting project here. Here's our contact information if you want to take a screenshot of it or a photo of it. We'll try to leave this up for a little bit here. But again, yeah, we're very excited about this project. We're excited to be partaking in this conference with so many other exciting project teams and people just in general who are enthusiastic about this in the industry. And we look forward to hopefully speaking about it some more and answering some good questions from you guys. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Mike Eliason. I'm with Large Lab in Seattle. We're here for the Q&A for this wonderful session. First question, I believe this is for Kent. Did you guys look at any developments in Europe when planning this project?
Actually, we did, Dylan. I think it was the project in Heidelberg, if you can correct me, Dylan. We did look at that, and we actually talked to the architect that was part of that. So yeah, we did. But we couldn't find anything still quite comparable to what we were doing. So.
There's a lot of really amazing work on the eco-district scale, and Bonstadt, which I think is the Heidelberg project, is a great one. Kent, can you talk a little bit about the breakdown of the affordability? Like, are all of the affordable units small scale, or is it the diversity in unit sizes?
No, the affordable units are exactly the same as all of the market rate units. And they're evenly distributed by unit type, unit size, same level of finish, and equally distributed throughout all of the buildings. So you walk into one, you won't know whether it's affordable or market rate.
That's great. There were a couple of questions about project outreach. Can you talk a little bit about the process for that?
Oh gosh, that process was very involved, and it took many years. There wasn't anybody we didn't meet with. There probably isn't a door in Newton that wasn't knocked on at least twice. We constantly met with, like I say, anybody that would meet with us, and we listened to them. But the most active and most influential group in terms of our sustainability strategy was a group called Green Newton, who really brought us along in this process. And actually, they don't get enough credit for how they brought us along in this. And really, Mother Earth, Michelle, was really instrumental in all of that as well, and helping us with all of that outreach.
Did you get a lot of pushback through that process?
Well, there's you get a lot of pushback just because it's a new development. But in terms of our embracing of Passive House and other sustainability strategies, no pushback there. I think we probably went farther than they expected, because once we embraced it wholeheartedly. It was originally supposed to be required for only 3 of our buildings. We're doing it for all but 4 of the buildings. We've employed passive house. All the buildings will be LEED, but and all but 4 will be passive house. So, but yeah, there was quite a bit. I mean, this project, that's a whole nother case study in the community involvement process and the way that, because of how we spent time in the community, when it came time for the opponents to rise up and try to stop the project, the people that we had nurtured and cultivated along the way and listened to and incorporated their ideas and their wishes into the project where we could, they took on the support of our project and were able to take it through a public process that was trying to turn over the project, turn down the project.
I can just add briefly that it was really the sustainability components and the story of this project that really, gathered the community, the Newton community members who were passionate about the newly passed climate action plan in Newton, and the sustainability ordinance that was being drafted literally in parallel with the permitting of this project. They really were able to rally around what we were doing and the story behind that, and really help be proponents for the project when, as Kent said, there were some, opposition from different groups. They really were able to be a part of our team in promoting it because of all of the sustainability and energy efficiency components of the project.
And the affordability component was very big as well. It's the largest affordable housing project in Newton right now.
Michelle, you mentioned the sustainability ordinance. I'm kind of fascinated by this. Are you required to do an LCA for the process? And then do you know if the ordinance is affecting other policies in adjacent cities?
Sure. So there's actually quite a bit of activity in our region around Boston and the surrounding suburban communities on net zero zoning, and also policy around embodied carbon and doing LCA. And as we mentioned, this was, really going through permitting a couple of years ago, starting in 2018, when all of this was sort of newly developing. And the current sustainability ordinance in Newton does not require an LCA. It left it really sort of open-ended and up to the team to determine how to best analyze and reduce the embodied carbon specifically. There are other places, the city of Boston, the city of Cambridge, that are also currently drafting embodied carbon related policy, looking at whether or not they would require a whole building LCA and then potentially reductions. So it's all sort of happening right now in our region. And so, our team was really interested and excited to sort of understand this and investigate it kind of along with the city and Green Newton, working on this and developing these ordinances.
Oops, sorry. And sticking with the policy question, there's a question about passive house as a prerequisite for all electrification. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can take this one. I just sort of briefly responded to this in the chat, but I'll sort of elaborate on that response in that passive house, I think, and really when we talk about passive house, we talk about sort of reducing the loads in these buildings, not just heating and cooling, but also reducing domestic hot water loads. Because as I mentioned, domestic hot water is probably the hardest thing to electrify in multifamily buildings in this climate right now. The passive house strategies really include the design measures that reduce your heating load, reduce your cooling load, and reduce your domestic hot water load in particular. And in order to maximize the cost effectiveness of electrification, which is a huge issue and a huge component to this, you really need to be aware of these design measures that reduce these loads first, so that way the cost effectiveness of electrification is achieved. So I think absolutely it should be a prerequisite.
And then the question just popped up in the chat is photovoltaics required to meet the energy metric for this project? Did you look at a centralized DHW system as well? I think you talked about that, but.
Yeah, so photovoltaics currently are not required to meet the PER criteria under the current standard.
A couple of our buildings are close to the threshold, but they are passing just with the building design efficiency measures exclusive of the photovoltaic systems. But the PV systems are, they're part of the design regardless. So, where we can take credit for them, we will, but they're not necessarily required. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second question?
If you guys looked at a centralized DHW system rather than the decentralized.
Yeah, so the big issue there was really metering and passing on the hot water cost to the tenants, which would require a separate set of meters for the hot water system on the central recirculation or on the central hot water piping, which is a cost issue. It's a maintenance issue, and we had a path forward with decentralized electric tanks to meet the criteria for passive house. So that was ultimately the decision.
And we're just about at our 8-minute mark, so I'll do one more question. Will there be case studies or metrics, shared for the project? How do people find out more, kind of on the background of it?
Hopefully we'll be doing case studies because we think this is a fabulous story to tell in so many different ways, but we've been so busy trying to make it happen. We haven't had time to stop to other than to do things like this and share our experiences. But yeah, it definitely needs to have so like I say, there's so many aspects of this project that should be written about.
No, I mean, I think it's great, and I'm looking forward to seeing it finalized. Hopefully I'll make it out to Boston in a couple of years and see it. And I think we're at time, so we'll close it there. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us, and ciao, ciao.